I'm here today to talk about America. America as this great experiment. An experiment designed to test the hypothesis that our founding fathers had, that you can have government for the people and by the people. Yes, that was their big experiment that we are living today. It has been going on for over 200 years. And these are experiments in democracy, they're experiments in enterprise, they're experiments that express who we want to be as a country and as a society. And all of these experiments have a few things in common. They're always difficult. If they were easy, everyone would do it. They're often inconvenient, and they're quite common. It'll be uncomfortable along the way. The discomfort will come when this experiment pushes us away from our biases, forces our mind to expand and think differently. And yeah, like all social experiments, this idea of government for the people and by the people, it's going to have its critics. Every one of our values that we express as a society is an underlying experiment that is below this big umbrella that I talk about of America. And I'm here today to talk about one of those experiments, the great experiment that I call the public land experiment. It didn't happen by accident, it happened on purpose. It goes back a long time. It starts with Thomas Jefferson in 1803. We all know Thomas Jefferson. His fingerprints are on just about all of our long-lasting documents of governance. Him and our founding fathers believed that a country would be stronger if everybody owned land, either directly or indirectly. And indirectly, they could accomplish that by being a citizen, we would have land held in trust on behalf of the citizens. So this land that we are on right here today was the very first step in this experiment, what I call the acquisition period of the experiment. Thomas Jefferson signed the Louisiana Purchase and started us on a 70-year path where through purchase, through war, through treaties, the United States accumulated almost 2 billion acres of public land to carry out this experiment that Jefferson started. And from that acquisition experiment, we went into the phase that I will call the distribution phase of the experiment. What's a young nation to do with almost 2 billion acres of land? Well, there's a lot. They need to develop this land. They need people to come and settle this land. So 500 million acres were granted to those hardy homesteaders who decided to come out here and give it a try. Industry was deemed important to these lands. You look at the railroad companies, the mining companies, the timbering companies, they were granted millions of acres. And then there was this statehood thing. As the states became admitted to the Union, they were all given millions of acres to hold in trust, to fund their school systems. And by the time this distribution phase of the experiment was over 1.2 billion, or 2/3 of that land, had been granted. What remained were 600 million acres deemed too arid for agriculture, not worthy for industry or commerce. And along comes another president, Theodore Roosevelt, 100 years after Jefferson, who decides, well, these remnants here, I think I'm going to make something of this. During my period, my conservation ethic is going to be reflected in these public lands of America. I don't think it's any accident that the two people who really set this experiment on its path and then put us in this maintenance phase we're in today, or management phase, their faces are on Mount Rushmore. To me, that means this experiment probably had some value. So Roosevelt looks at all this and he says, well, these lands need agencies to manage them. They need budgets. They need accountability to Congress. He puts all that in place. And along the way, he's got his critics. But this management phase of the experiment is well on its way. And that's where we are today. Roosevelt acted boldly, and he decided that for those yet unborn, as he would say, those in the womb of time, these lands shall have value. We were those people yet unborn. We were those people in the womb of time. So here we are, 110 years after Roosevelt leaves office, and the great American experiments are still ongoing, and we're forced to ask ourselves, like we do with all of these experiments, are they worthwhile? Should we continue them? Well, I would say any experiment that could survive a civil war, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, span 40 presidential administrations and 100 Congresses, that's probably an experiment we should keep going. But the critics will want hard data. Okay, I'm a CPA, I'll give you a little hard data. These public lands are the backbone of our outdoor recreation economy that is growing and is 2% of our GDP. These public lands are at the core of our natural resource economy that is 1.5% of our GDP and is very critical to our national security. We have clean air, we have clean water. How do you value that? How do you value the recreation that all of us can go and do the things that Roosevelt dreamed of? I would say these public lands of America represent the greatest concentration of undistributed wealth on the planet. That's my feeling, and I think most people would say, yeah, these are very valuable to us. This experiment has proven itself. But no American experiment is static and stays the same. It's ever-changing, and it's always the path ahead. We can learn from the history of behind. We can look in the rearview mirror. But we cannot base everything on what happened. We, governing for the people, by the people, you, me, you, all of us, we are making decisions every day. Every time is a crossroad. Every generation, every election are crossroads about what are we going to do with this experiment for those yet unborn? Well, we look out the front windshield and we say, well, we know that the planet has 7 point whatever billion people, soon to be 8 billion, then 10 billion. We know our own country has 330 million people, soon to be 400 million. We know it's a fact that as population grows, undeveloped, wide open spaces of valuable land get scarce. And we know that the more scarce something is, the more valuable it is. That's not Randy Newberg making that up. Pretty much everybody, every economist, every person would agree those facts hold true. And that is what we see in the road ahead. So we mix that with what we know in the rearview mirror, the history of where we are, what it is that this experiment has brought us, both in terms of financial values, but in our value as a society. And this is where these American experiments tend to overlay one another. The great American experiment about government for the people and by the people comes into play because all of us are part of the people. Every time we engage in our government, we get to make decisions about these experiments. This experiment, the great public land experiment, will always be judged on what value it's going to provide. And who are the people who get to be that judge? We the people. Everything you do, every way you act in your government, every time you engage, when you vote, when you serve on councils, when you write letters to the editor, you get to say, should this experiment continue? You get the chance to act boldly, as Roosevelt would say, for those still in the womb of time. And thankfully, in America, these experiments are in the hand of we the people. Choose wisely.